I always thought of my mother as different from other mothers. She sounded different from other mothers. She pronounced words differently, and she had a past that other mothers didn't have.
She loved to sew, she loved to embroider, she loved creating beautiful things. Our mother was very driven to tell the story. She wanted us to know it, she wanted us to remember.
It was a way of connecting me and my sister with the family that she had lost. Her mother, her father, her sisters, her brother, nearly everyone that she loved in the world. At some point, she really began to look to me to be the storyteller. I had just read The Diary of Anne Frank, which came out around then. And so I started writing it. But I knew even then that nobody could really tell my mother's story. It was her story to tell.
I wanted to show my kids how I grew up. And I was trying desperately, but I never drew anything in my life. I said, well, I'm going to try. So I bought this piece of cheap fabric. I thought I was just going to mess around with. And I took a ruler, and I still see my house the way it was. And I just drew the lines, and then I started filling it out with crewel work. And then I made this straw roof, sort of. Now, when I finished the house, I was really satisfied the way it looked. That's the way it looked.
And once she found that way, it just poured out of her.
We grew up in Brooklyn, in a working-class neighborhood. My father worked as a manager for a supermarket, and until I was about 10, my mother was at home. Very often while she was cooking, I would be sitting at the kitchen table, and she would tell me stories. She might, for example, be making a potato kugel, and she would tell me about how her mother used to make potato kugels and growing the potatoes and then going to get the eggs from the chickens. And so she would create this whole other world for me of her life before the war. My mother grew up in a little tiny village in the center of Poland. And where she came from, everything was done by animals. They had no cars, no machines, no electricity, no running water.
My childhood home in the village of Nishik, Poland. I am carrying Voda up the hill to our house. My sister Manya waits for me. My brother Ruben is standing with the wagon. My father and my sister Hannah are in front of the house, along with my mother, who holds my youngest sister, Leah.
All the Jews raise their chickens. They all have chickens, and a few people had the cows for milking.
And she recalls swimming in the river and the cows grazing in the pasture.
She was very happy at what she had created because she was able to show us what her childhood home looked like.
The celebration of the Jewish holidays was central to their lives. It was how they marked the passage of time.
Shavuos 1938. My brother and sisters followed as I walked on stilts to our grandparents' house.
My brother was always the one that they would make toys and I was going to test them. So he built these tall stilts, and I was supposed to walk on them. And all the kids are following me, and my brother's following me, and see if I'm going to fall down. But I made it all the way to the Zaydis' house.
March 1939. Every year before Passover, the Jewish women of Nishik would gather at Model the shoemaker's house to bake matzahs. The aroma of the matzahs filling the room. These were the last matzahs we ever had in Nishik.
When I was in high school, my mother decided to open a women's clothing store. At first, she had the store in Brooklyn for a number of years, Esther's clothing store. And then in 1983, she and my father moved the business to Frederick, Maryland, to be close to her grandchildren.
And then she started making things for her grandchildren. She had a very full life with her beautiful grandchildren.
After this period of sweetness, when she was about 60, she returned to these memory pictures. She continued until the time she died, and by that point she had created 36 pictures altogether. And the first picture that she did was of a dream that she had had during the war that left these very deep impressions on her.
I had this dream about my mother, and she dragged me, and she pulled me. And I said, Mom, where are we running? She said, the sky is falling. See the black sky? When I turned around, there was the sky with the stars in it reaching the barn. She said, if it falls on the ground, we all die.
When she created those pictures of her dreams, she realized that she could tell the story that way, that the whole story could be told.
1939, the word came around, and the Nazis, the Germans, are already in Rachov. As we spotted them, that they were coming on horses, one of them jumped off the horse and he said, Halt, you there! And they saw a beard, anybody with a beard was a Jew. And he started beating up my Zayden. And he grabbed the beard, cut it with his bayonet. He cut his beard off.
He was an elder of the village. He was a very respected and venerated person, and he was her grandfather besides. And to see him treated in that way marked the beginning of the war for my mother.
In the countryside, there simply weren't enough Jews to make it worthwhile to create a ghetto. And so Jews suffered in other ways. Roundups for labor camps, random shootings, mass shootings in the woods.
It became a time of terror for the entire village and for my mother. Her childhood vanished when she was 12 years old.
My sister and I brought our cows to the good pasture near the Vistula River. Through the trees, I discovered we were next to the Yanishev prison camp.
And I didn't know how close I was to this camp. It was so close. I saw everything that was going on through the bushes. The guys, wheeling the wheelbarrows up the hill with the mud. And then I saw them leading these boys into the forest. And I heard shots. All the time I was there, I heard shots in the forest. They called it death camp because it was a death camp. Nobody came alive out of that.
One of the paradoxes in an image like the heaven and hell image is that no matter how horrible the Holocaust, the flowers kept blooming, the trees kept bearing fruit, the cows had to be milked, and there was a way in which that normalcy in the midst of horror is something she captures.
What she's saying is, look what happened here. It's so stark, the contrast. It's a way of really riveting your attention.
And one morning, there was still, like the beginning of September, there were knocks on the window. Raus, du verfluchte Schweinejuden, raus. And it was still darker. Once my father opened the door, they got in and they pushed us all out. We were all in the shirts, the white shirts. And they lined us up, and I thought they were going to kill us. Right by the river, lined us up. And we were all hysterical, the children. And my mother was begging them, and one guy stays with the machine gun, with a real machine gun. And then the day was breaking, and the Poles came out. A lot of Poles standing in the other side street and looking at us like we were freaks.
After the morning raid, the Gestapo were returning. We fled across the fields to the woods, my mother directing me to separate.
So we thought the horror was over, right? And my brother came running. They're coming again. So my brother and father ran into the bushes, and my mother took us, myself and the two younger kids, out in the fields. In the fields, September, there was still something blooming. Yellow strip and a blue strip. So we went through these blooming fields and we're heading for the forest. Like my mother always knew that I'm responsible, that I know how to take care of myself. And she thought if the Nazis chase around and look for us, didn't want to be all caught. She said, you go that way. And they were going that way.
The act of a child separating from her mother has to be very, very dramatic, very traumatic. And the question, I think, for Esther was how to represent it. And the way in which Esther has brilliantly stitched the meadow into the body, I would call the immersion in the meadow. And the field itself seems to stretch out into infinity and stretch out into a massive hiding place.
Her mother keeps giving her permission to survive. You go that way. Her mother has told her. And so it holds what comes later.
My mother did 5 pictures describing the events of October 15th, 1942. It was clearly the center of her body of work and clearly a central memory.
This is my family on the morning of October 15, 1942. We were ordered by the Gestapo to leave our homes by 10 a.m. to join all the other Jews on the road to Krasnik Railroad Station, and then to their death.
They find you after 10 o'clock on your property, you shot to death. I screamed all night, I cried, I am not going to Krasnik. My father became mute, he couldn't talk. My mother was trying to calm us down, so I begged my mother. I said, Mama, Tata, I said, you had so many friends, farmers, friends. Can't you think of anybody that I could go to? Mama said, Herrisch, you know somebody? So my father said, Efshe Stefan in Dombrova. I call her Stefan, that's all I need. I'm going to Stefan. So the little one, the youngest one, Leitje, who I actually brought up, started crying, Esther, nimm mir, take me, Esther, take me. It's still ringing in my ears. Take me. And actually my mother pulled her back. She said, you're too little. You have to be able to work on a farm. So Mama says, Mani, go with Esther.
We left our house for good and walked down the road. Model sat in the front wagon, holding the Torah. My parents went to join him, while my brother helped my little sister settle into the wagon. Suddenly, Model's daughter-in-law stood up and cried to my mother, "We will never come back. We will all perish."
It was horrible. We all clinked, and my mother says, Gateskinder, efshe wird hier bleiben, like, go, maybe you will live.
She and her sister Manya are already out of the picture, and what she's recalling in the foreground are her parents and the rest of her family getting into the wagons. When she did this picture, she was imagining what it must have been like for her mother to say goodbye, to let her children go, because she could no longer protect them. And that was so emotional.
The wagons left for Krasnik railroad station, and we never saw our family again. It was the beginning of the end, the somber march of the Rach of Jews to their death.
She includes at the very center this line of humanity on its way to the train station in Krasnik, and it could be the Jews from all over Europe.
The skies from morning to night, they were black, Larry. I mean, black and black clouds. It was horrible. The way we were crying, the sky was filled with blackness, and the crows, they were flying like vultures all over us.
There's no way that one image can fully capture and fully express what the nature of that experience was. And so to return to it over and over again is to indicate how enormous it was in her life and in her memory.
I think that by stitching this, she was giving herself some emotional space, some emotional distance to relive it again, but in a way in which she could confront it safely.
You can tell the whole story in 5 or 10 minutes, but it could take her days, weeks, even months to tell the story by stitching it, a stitch at a time.
It's almost a metaphor for any kind of remembering, that you pull a thread out and you put it in, and you pull it out and you put it in. Every time she returns to it, she's saying, I know this moment. I remember this moment, and I remember the people.
My sister and I arrived in the village of Dombrova and went to the house of Stefan, our father's friend.
So we found Stefan. I said, we are Herr's daughters, please help us. And the two of us, we threw ourselves on him and we broke down. I felt his hands went around both of us. He squeezed us and he said, shh, and he closed the door. I'll help you. And he put us up at the attic. Big torrential rains came Friday night. It was tearing us apart just to think of what they're doing there out in the field by the railroad. Sunday morning, he called us down. When we came down, I saw the baskets by the door ready. And he said, dear children, the whole Mniszek knows you are here. And if the Germans will come, they'll kill you, they'll burn my farm and kill my family.
After 2 days, he sent us out into the rain, with no place to go but the forest.
I said, we cannot stay here in the woods. We're going to be suspected as Jewish right away.
My mother realizes that for them to survive, they cannot be Herr's daughters anymore. And so she comes up with a new identity for herself and for Manya, Polish Catholic farm girls.
I tell her, here what we're going to do. Her name Maria, I'm Josephine.
They had to pretend that they could not understand German because Yiddish, their native tongue, was a German derivative. After they left Stefan's house, they went back to Mniszek, to their home village, to see what had happened. They went to their next-door neighbor, Zembina.
She said, "Go to hell. Don't ever come back here. The Germans, the Nazis are looking for Jews every day." And when she said that, there was no other farm I would go to. It was so dark. We had to hold on by the hand not to get lost. We head out into the fields. We stumbled into this pile of debris. And I said, this is where we're going to dig in. Pushed ourselves in. We shivered through because who could sleep? I was cold.
Sometimes I was angry. I was telling her, look, wherever we spend the night, we don't spend the day. What's going to be with us? Well, she said, don't worry, we're going to survive. God will help.
We stopped blaming each other. She didn't blame me anymore. We were in it. That's it.
And they came to the village of Grabovka. She was working for this elderly man whose wife was infirm and really needed a lot of help on his farm.
He had beehives, honeybees, and there was an empty lot, and I said to him, can I dig up and plant vegetables like chaff and strawberries and dill and parsley and all that? He said, do whatever you want. It's all yours. So I was the boss.
There's no question that she felt protected by nature, that nature was a place that could hide her, it's a place that could feed her, and the beauty of it is something she never lost.
While I was tending the garden I had planted, 2 Nazi soldiers appeared and began to talk to me. I couldn't let them know that I understood them, so I just shook my head as they spoke. Jadek, the old farmer, came to stand watch nearby, but the honeybees rescued me first, swarming around the soldiers. Why aren't they stinging you? The soldier asked Jadek as they ran out of the garden.
I think she was kind of tickled by the fact that this tiny little creature could do what nobody else could do, which was to drive off the Germans.
And sometimes I used to work in the fields, even by the moon. I cried, say I was alone, and I was thinking of them. And I see the abundance that we eat here, and I always thought, what are they eating? Where are they? And I even taught Manya that we had to learn, and we did train ourselves not to get emotional, not to come tears. We told each other we cry inside.
July 1944. At sundown, Russian infantry marched into the village of Grabovka. The neighbors and I rushed to the fence to look at the soldiers. Finally, freedom had come for Manya and me. I left Grabovka and returned to Mniszek. None of my family was there.
There were no Jews that had come back. There were no survivors. But one of the neighbors thought that perhaps the Jews might have been taken to Majdanek, a concentration camp not terribly far from where they lived. So my mother decided to go to Majdanek. This was the first time where she saw with her own eyes what had actually happened to the Jews during the war.
I went to Majdanek to search for signs of them. I looked through the piles of worn shoes, but they all looked the same.
She shows horrendous detail, things that you really don't want to know. The cabbages that are in a field that's built on the ashes of the Jews, the crematoria, the shoes, thousands of pairs of shoes. It became expressed in zillions of little stitches, but I think her need was every single bit of this has to be confronted. We can't turn away from it.
After seeing the gas chambers and the crematorium, I joined the Polish and Russian armies stationed there, and soon left for Germany.
She was with an army. She wasn't just a girl hiding with her sister. She was now part of the victors. After the war ended, my mother went back to Poland to get Manya, and the two of them made their way to a DP camp, a displaced persons camp, in the American zone in Germany. And there, my mother met my father, who was also a survivor from Poland. My aunt met her husband, likewise a survivor, and they each got married in the camp. Everybody was looking to start a new life. My aunt and uncle emigrated to Palestine, Israel, and my father had relatives in New York, so they decided to emigrate to the United States. They stopped in Belgium when I was born there.
June 10, 1949. We arrive in New York.
The sky is wide open. There are white birds, seagulls flying in the sky.
Max's cousin Clara came aboard the ship to greet us. As our daughter Bernice slept in her father's arms, Clara said to her, "My dear child, this will be your America."
Esther has left us an extraordinary account of her personal experience, transformed by her exceptional artistry. It is a way for a new generation to begin to explore these terrible events. They are very different from the way in which the Holocaust is generally taught. Genocide has not stopped, so her message is as fresh and as important as ever.
People still starve, or people are still murdered, or children are turned into killing soldiers, and there's a stillness in the world about it. But it's my hope the passing on witnessing of the Holocaust helps put light on all atrocities.
She wanted to record her memories of her family. She was never really interested in doing this as an artist. She was doing this simply to record. It was documentary to her. To us, it was art.